Chapter 23. Game of Drones. The war in Ukraine did not begin in February 2022, when Russian tanks rolled across the border. It began long before, in the shadows of the Cold War, in the paranoia that settled over the Kremlin after the fall of the Soviet Union, and in the whispers that kept telling Russia it was destined for humiliation unless it struck back. Those whispers were not Putin's invention. They were the voice of the war brain, nudging, shaping, tempting him to rewrite history with blood. Putin saw himself as the restorer of empire, the man who would bring Russia back from its knees after the humiliations of the 1990s. He imagined himself as a master strategist, a chess player on the grand board of Europe. But the truth is simpler and crueler. He was the perfect pawn. His fears, his vanity, his need to be remembered as more than just another bureaucrat, all of these were the hooks the war brain needed. Once it had him, he was never going to escape. The OS does not need to whisper into every ear. It only needs one leader, one man with enough power to mobilize millions. Putin was ideal, cold, disciplined, shaped by the machinery of the KGB, but insecure, humiliated by the loss of the Soviet Empire, obsessed with the idea that Russia was destined to be surrounded and diminished by the West. These were not rational calculations. They were primal fears, programmed by the war brain into a mind that thought itself immune. And once they took root, the outcome was inevitable. The war brain thrives on the absurd. What could be more absurd than Russians and Ukrainians, cousins, neighbors, speaking nearly the same language, sharing centuries of blood, marriage, and culture, slaughtering one another in muddy fields that neither side truly owns? Yet here they were, convinced that each was defending its destiny, each willing to send its sons into trenches. Ukrainians said they were defending freedom. Russians said they were defending Mother Russia. Both were defending nothing at all, except the hidden logic of the OS, which needed another great experiment in killing. This war was never really about territory. It was about technology. The war brain had grown tired of tanks and artillery alone. Those were old toys. What it wanted now was the next stage. Drones, satellites, cyber warfare, precision strikes guided by algorithms. Ukraine became the testing ground for the future of slaughter, and both sides, blinded by patriotism, poured themselves into this experiment without ever realizing they were not fighting for victory. They were fighting to update the code of killing. Drones filled the skies over Donetsk, Kharkiv, and Kherson. At first, small buzzing machines, no larger than a child's toy, carrying grenades to drop on trenches. Then larger ones, carrying heavier loads, guided by satellites, invisible until they struck. Each new drone was another iteration, another data point, in the war brain's laboratory. The OS wanted to know how best to kill cheaply, how best to terrify without risking pilots, how best to make the sky itself a weapon in every war to come. Ukraine was the perfect place to find out. And the humans? Oh, the humans played their roles with tragic sincerity. A Ukrainian soldier crouched in a trench, hearing the faint buzz above him, praying that the small black dot overhead did not choose him as its target. A Russian conscript, shivering in a foxhole, knowing that his commanders saw him as expendable, that he was meat, sent forward so the Kremlin could buy time. Neither knew why he was there, neither questioned the logic. Both thought they were fighting for their homeland. In reality, they were guinea pigs in a laboratory of steel and fire. Putin, of course, believed he was in control. He pictured himself as a modern czar, shaping history, restoring Russia's greatness. Yet even his so-called strategic blunders were not blunders at all. They were the OS discarding him, as it had discarded Hitler decades before. Just as Hitler had been allowed his early triumphs before being nudged into catastrophic mistakes, so too was Putin lured into the quagmire. He expected Ukraine to fall in weeks. Instead, he found his armies bogged down, his economy strained, his reputation eroded. The war brain needed him to start the fire, not to win it. Once he had done his part, his purpose was fulfilled. What did the war brain want from this slaughter? Refugees, for one. Millions of Ukrainians fled westward, pouring into Poland, Germany, France, even the United States. This was the gene pool expanding again. The same trick played during the Crusades. The same logic behind Alexander's conquests and Rome's endless campaigns. When populations mix under duress, the OS smiles. Stronger bloodlines emerge. Cultures collide. Ideas spread. Humans call it tragedy. The war brain calls it progress. It also wanted fear. Europe had grown too complacent, too content in its illusion of peace. The war brain despises comfort. It thrives on anxiety, because anxiety makes humans innovate. And innovate they did. German engineers worked overtime to supply Leopard tanks. Americans rushed new artillery systems and precision-guided rockets. Ukrainians improvised drone tactics that no military academy had ever taught. Every day the war dragged on, new methods of destruction were born. That was the true prize. And yet, the cruelty of the war brain is most obvious not in the victories or defeats, but in the illusions it plants. Russians believed they were fighting to denazify Ukraine, a laughable propaganda line, yet enough to convincing millions. Ukrainians believed they were fighting for freedom and democracy, even as their country was reduced to rubble. Western leaders told themselves they were fighting for a rules-based order, as if rules have ever restrained slaughter. Everyone had a story. Everyone believed their story. And none of it mattered, because behind every speech, every drone strike, every tear-streaked refugee was the same cold logic. The war brain needed a new battlefield, and it had found one. The West tells itself that it had no choice, that when Russia invaded Ukraine, NATO had to respond, that if the world let Putin succeed, it would be appeasement, a repeat of Munich in 1938, and history would repeat itself. This story feels righteous, but it is the same story the war brain always plants. If we do not fight now, the future will be worse. It whispers urgency, inevitability, catastrophe just around the corner, and humans believe it. They always do. Yet what choice did the West really have? Had NATO not expanded eastward for decades, inching closer and closer to Russia's borders, would Putin have acted? Had Western leaders not sought to encircle Moscow with alliances, would the paranoia in the Kremlin have boiled over? Both sides told themselves they were defending security, when in reality, both were pawns, executing a script written long before they were born. The war brain loves mirrors. Russians looked west and saw NATO aggression. NATO looked east and saw Russian expansionism. Each reflected the other's fears, each convinced that it was only responding, never provoking. This hall of mirrors is the OS's favorite trick because it guarantees escalation. Each move feels defensive, yet the board fills with armies. The technology of persuasion was also upgraded in this war. Propaganda was no longer confined to state speeches or leaflets. It lived on Twitter feeds, Telegram channels, and TikTok clips. Soldiers filmed themselves launching rockets. Civilians posted videos of airstrikes. Every bomb dropped was instantly framed in stories. Heroes resisting invaders, or patriots defending holy Russia. The war brain had found a new tool, social media, and used it to perfection. Humans thought they were sharing truth. In reality, they were amplifying slaughter, one viral clip at a time. And what of the soldiers? Many Russians did not even know they were going to war until the orders came. Conscripts barely trained, thrown across the border like meat into a grinder. Ukrainians, fighting on their own soil, rallied with a passion that seemed unbreakable. Both sides told themselves they fought for justice, but the reality was that most of them had no idea why they were killing or dying. They only knew that to refuse would mean prison, dishonor, or death at the hands of their own. The war brain delights in this trap. You fight because not fighting seems impossible, even though fighting achieves nothing. The new icon of this war, however, was not the tank or the trench. It was the drone. A buzzing insect in the sky, sometimes built in a factory, sometimes cobbled together in a garage, carrying death in its belly. A drone costs a few $100s. It can kill a man worth 20 years of life. The asymmetry is perfect, and the OS loves efficiency. The drone does not get tired, does not fear, does not question why. It is pure execution. Humans imagine they are inventing drones to save pilots' lives. In reality, they are inventing them to normalize killing at a distance, to erase the last hesitation. This is the warbrain's genius. It sells humans safety while giving itself new weapons. It whispers, "Drones will protect your soldiers," and humans nod, grateful. They do not see that the drones are not protecting anyone. They are accelerating the pace of slaughter. Soon every war will be drone war. Ukraine was only the beta test. Even the refugee crisis served the OS. Millions fled westward, mothers with children, old men clutching bags, students with nothing but phones. Europeans opened their homes, schools, and hospitals. It looked like compassion, and in many ways it was. But compassion was only the surface. Beneath it, genes were mixing, cultures blending, populations redistributing. Just as in the Crusades, just as in Alexander's campaigns, just as in Rome's expansions, the warbrain had engineered movement on a scale that no peacetime could have achieved. The human tide swept across borders, and no one could stop it. And then there is energy. Oil, gas, pipelines, the veins of modern life. Russia supplied Europe with fuel, and Europe built its industries on that flow. When the war began, those ties were severed. Pain followed, but also innovation. Europe rushed to renewables, liquefied natural gas, and energy independence. Humans believed they were adapting rationally. The warbrain knew it was accelerating the timeline. The OS wanted humanity to push harder into new energy systems, and it knew only fear of freezing in winter would drive them. Putin's role in this was tragicomic. He thought he was punishing the West by cutting supplies, weaponizing energy. Instead, he weakened his own hand and forced Europe to diversify. The warbrain had played him beautifully. He had created the crisis that would reshape energy policy for decades. Just as Hitler had been allowed victories before being nudged into defeat, Putin had been permitted early illusions of power, only to be dragged into a quagmire. He was never a grand master. He was a pawn, executing code. The numbers tell the story, as they always do. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers dead or maimed, civilians buried under rubble, cities turned into wastelands. But behind those numbers are the outputs. Drones perfected, cyber warfare normalized, Western rearmament accelerated, refugees redistributed, energy systems reinvented. Humans call it tragedy. The warbrain calls it harvest. And when it is finished with this war, it will abandon it, as it has abandoned all the others. Just as it left Rome to crumble, just as it discarded Hitler in his bunker, it will leave Putin a husk, humiliated, remembered not as the man who restored Russia, but as the man who ruined it. That is always the fate of pawns. History always tells itself as a tale of leaders. We imagine emperors, generals, and presidents guiding the flow of events, their decisions shaping destiny. We write biographies, produce films, and hang portraits, all to preserve the illusion that a single man or woman steered the course of nations. But when the curtain is pulled back, what do we find? Not masters of fate, not titans of will, but puppets. And the hand inside the puppet is always the same, the warbrain. Consider Putin. To many, he appears as the calculating strategist, restoring Russia's greatness, standing against Western encirclement. To others, he is a paranoid dictator, deluded and cornered. But strip away the stories, and what remains? A man scarred by his country's collapse, humiliated by NATO's expansion, desperate for control. Those wounds, those fears, those ambitions, they are not his. They are strings the war brain pulled tight, shaping him into the perfect pawn for its next act. When he looked at Ukraine, he saw danger. He saw NATO creeping to his border, Western influence corrupting his neighbor, Russian identity slipping away. These visions were not revelations of genius. They were lines of code injected by the OS, whispers carefully tuned to his anxieties. If you do not strike now, you will lose everything. That whisper has lured countless rulers across time. Xerxes, Alexander, Napoleon, Hitler. It is always the same trick, the same voice, the same manipulation, and each man, thinking himself chosen, obeys. Zelensky, too, is hailed as a hero, the comedian turned statesman, the everyman who rallied a nation with defiance. His speeches electrified parliaments. His face appeared on magazine covers. His phrases were repeated like scripture. But what is he truly? Another puppet. The war brain needed Ukraine to resist. It needed courage, sacrifice, and moral clarity. And so Zelensky was elevated, transformed by circumstance into symbol. His charisma, his courage, his survival in Kiev, these were not choices. They were the OS, giving him the lines and pulling the strings, ensuring Ukrainians would fight to the last. The humans between these puppets, the soldiers, the civilians, the refugees, are not actors at all. They are the material of the stage. Cannon fodder is not a metaphor. It is the literal role they play. They exist to absorb bullets, to bleed, to die, to migrate, to carry genes across borders, to teach medics how to treat wounds, to test the durability of drones. Their suffering is data. Their corpses are currency. To the war brain, they are not individuals with names and dreams. They are resources to be spent, and the puppets do not care. They cannot care. The war brain ensures that. Imagine Putin sitting in a gilded Kremlin hall, receiving reports of tens of thousands of Russian soldiers dead. He does not weep. He does not despair. He nods, perhaps frowns, perhaps issues another order. Imagine Zelensky learning of entire Ukrainian towns shelled to rubble. He does not break down. He speaks of resilience, sacrifice, glory. The inability to grieve at scale is not failure of character. It is design. The war brain cannot afford leaders who falter at the sight of slaughter, and so it blinds them. It filters their perceptions, numbs their empathy, wraps them in myths of destiny. This is why leaders across history resemble each other, no matter the era or ideology. They stand above the battlefield, immune to its horror, convinced their cause justifies the carnage. They cannot see the mothers clutching dead children, the soldiers crawling in mud with shattered limbs, the civilians fleeing with nothing but a plastic bag. They see only maps, arrows, speeches, symbols. They are puppets who mistake the tug on their strings for inspiration. The most grotesque proof lies in the way leaders speak of sacrifice. We honor the fallen. They died for freedom. Their sacrifice was not in vain. These words are not consolation. They are anesthesia. The war brain inserts them into every puppet's mouth to silence doubt. If death is framed as noble, then the killing can continue. If loss is framed as gain, then more lives can be thrown into the fire. The leaders do not invent these words. The OS programs them. And what of the ordinary human, the so-called citizen, the one who votes, protests, or cheers from the sidelines? They too are puppets, though they imagine themselves free. Nationalism is a string, tugging their pride. Propaganda is a string, tugging their fears. Economic hardship is a string, tugging their anger. When the war brain wants a nation to march, it plucks those strings until the song is irresistible. Millions stand, salute, chant, or enlisted. They call it patriotism. It is choreography. Look closely, and you can see the comedy in this tragedy. Men who believe they fight for God, king, or democracy, when in truth, they fight because the OS has wound their instincts into frenzy. Women who believe they are nursing, teaching, or farming for their family, when in truth, they are maintaining the base of the war machine. Joinists who believe they are informing, when in truth, they are amplifying narratives crafted to sustain hostility. Puppets all, dancing, without knowing the dance exists. The Ukraine war has made this clearer than ever because of its immediacy. Never before has slaughter been live-streamed. Never before have puppet strings been so visible in real time. A Russian missile destroys an apartment block. Within minutes, images flood the world. Politicians issue condemnations. Newspapers run headlines. Citizens share hashtags. Each reaction feels spontaneous, moral, necessary, yet each is predictable, calculated, foreseen. The war brain has anticipated the outrage and woven it into the script. Outrage fuels resistance. Resistance fuels war. War fuels slaughter. Slaughter fuels progress. And progress is always the hidden prize. Already this war has normalized drones, advanced cybersecurity, accelerated energy transitions, hardened supply chains, reshaped global alliances. The dead, the maimed, the displaced, they are the cost. The war brain pays in flesh and collects in technology. The puppets never admit this, perhaps never even know it. They speak of freedom and sovereignty, of peace and justice. But beneath the words lies the code, unaltered, unbroken, unacknowledged. The most bitter irony is that even when humans glimpse the strings, they laugh them off. Conspiracies circulate that leaders are controlled, that wars are engineered, that unseen forces manipulate outcomes. People sense the puppet theater, but mislabel it. They blame cabals, secret societies, shadow governments. They cannot bring themselves to admit the truth. The puppeteer is inside their own skulls. The war brain is not external. It is the ancient software humming beneath every thought, every desire, every hatred. It makes puppets of us all. And so the cycle continues. Putin blusters, Zelensky pleads, Biden promises, NATO strategizes. Soldiers kill, civilians flee, journalists report, citizens argue. All of them convinced they are acting freely, all of them dancing to strings they cannot see. The war will end one day, as they all do. Maps will be redrawn, treaties signed, leaders disgraced or celebrated, and the war brain will move on, discarding its puppets, resetting its stage, pulling new strings. Humans will write histories of this war, full of names and dates and causes. They will debate who was right and who was wrong, who won and who lost. But the truth is simpler and darker. Everyone lost, because no one was free. The puppets danced, the slaughter mounted, and the war brain harvested what it wanted. That is the only story, the only constant, the only law. Until humanity rewrites its operating system, until it severs the strings, every leader will be a puppet, every war will be theater, and every death will be just another line of code in a program no one chose.